mentioned the surveillance issue. This gets to the TikTok issue, but I'm actually don't want to talk about TikTok. I just want you to understand that think of all the data going to Americans. And I have some email correspondents and friends who say, well, I mean, everybody else is doing this. TikTok doing it is no big deal, except there's an angle here with TikTok everybody misses. American corporations brokering and buying your data, they're there to sell you more ads. They're there to figure out who you are and what button they can push to get you to buy a good or service. The Chinese are actually looking for who needs to be eliminated and who needs to be bribed and who needs to be blackmailed. The Chinese are using your data for maliciousness when the American corporations buying your data are using it for capitalistic purposes. You may not like it. It may be an invasion of privacy, but you need to be able to distinguish between American corporations that want to sell you stuff and the Chinese that want to destroy you. And it is increasingly a problem. So now for years, I've thought about this. And it sounds a little crazy. But hear me out on this. I used to, a long time ago, program computers. I was never very good at it. It was very rudimentary. I enjoyed doing it. I could build myself games and stuff. But I always have been fascinated by computer programming. And what if you could add a little piece of code here, just an innocuous line? And then you develop more code and you add an innocuous line. Then you develop more code and you add an innocuous line. And when the three pieces of software collide, those three innocuous lines combine, and now you got a computer virus, completely undetected computer virus, just an errant line of code over a series of different programs that work in conjunction with each other. And as they work in conjunction with each other, suddenly you got a computer virus. It's an intriguing concept, except it's no longer a concept. There is the XZ backdoor now. There's a compression utility. Now, what's a compression utility? A compression utility takes a very large file and it compresses it so it makes it easily transmittable over the internet. There's a compression utility called XZUtils, and it had malicious code in it. The developer of the program found the malicious code. And essentially what it does is it creates a backdoor, and a backdoor opens up sections of computer systems so hackers can go through and steal information. Turns out the malicious code had been put there by Jia Tan. I'm probably mispronouncing the name. I don't know who he is. I don't know if he's working with the Chinese. I don't know. Asian, but he's a developer who added a backdoor into this compression utility. Now here's the catch. This individual, this developer who added a backdoor, it was open source, which means people around the world can collaborate together on the software. This guy who put in the malicious backdoor for the hackers had been contributing legitimate patches and upgrades for quite a while. Was a team player, so to speak. The ultimate goal was a backdoor into OpenSSH. Now, that's computer programming speak for you, but what you need to know is that the attackers put their code in a compression library that was dependent on another library, itself sometimes dependent on OpenSSH. Now, for those of you who are completely convoluted into what this actually is, well, you take these three pieces of software that are independent standalone pieces of software, you put them together to compress and decompress information, and suddenly it opens a backdoor into your computer system, and so hackers can get in. And you never even know it because the software is about compressing and decompressing large files. So why would it have anything to do with opening backdoors to the hackers? It shouldn't, except this guy programmed it to do that. And you know the only reason this was found was because the guy who came up with the program originally was curious. Why was it taking his computer 0.7 of a second to connect to the internet instead of 0.2 of a second to connect to the internet, because it had always taken 0.2 of a second to connect to the internet, and suddenly it's taking 0.7 of a second, and he was curious as to why. And he found the malicious code from the guy who had been a regular contributor. Now, let's back this out. Walk this out. This is a complex issue. I'm dumbing it down and trying to simplify it. For those of you who aren't in tech, don't shoot me, nerds. But you have a guy who seemed to be a legitimate programmer contributing to software, and over time started contributing malicious code that opened back doors for nefarious purposes. Now, back that out. Let's say the guy was working for China. We don't know that he was, but let's say he was. Suddenly, for nationalistic purposes for China, hackers are doing stuff like this, opening up doors around the world. Now, let's take TikTok. Not only are they getting into your computer systems through backdoors that they've hacked maliciously, they're sending all of your data that comes through TikTok back into China. They're routing the information into China. They're trying to figure out who's persuadable and who's not. Who do they need to take out? Who do they need to blackmail? Who do they need to harass? Who in government is worth bullying? Who in government is worth censoring? Who in government is worth blackmailing based on their searches and deviancies they hide online? Now let's step forward into the elections process, because there's some stunning data out in Canada in 2019. A group of known and suspected People's Republic of China related threat actors in China, including officials, worked with one another to covertly advance PRC interests through Canadian democratic institutions. In fact, it appears that 11 political candidates and 13 political staff members were assessed to be either implicated in or impacted by the group from the Communist Party of China. 7 candidates were from the Liberal Party of Canada or were from the Conservative Party of Canada. Some of these individuals appeared willing to cooperate in foreign intelligence-related activities, while others appear to be unaware of potential foreign intelligence-related activity due to its clandestine nature. In one example, intelligence reports indicate officials from the PRC met with political staffers and specifically conveyed their expectation that the staffers screen candidates' attendance at certain events, such as those hosted by Taiwanese officials. Intelligence assessments suggest that some of these threat actors receive financial support from the People's Republic of China to do this and to influence elections in China. But it's not just happening in China. It's happening in this country as well. There's a growing body of evidence the Chinese have been able to or attempting to shape information inside the United States. This is from NBC News. A more aggressive China tried to influence the 2022 midterms, according to U.S. intelligence reports. There were no signs that they were able to successfully hack our systems, but in at least one case, Chinese officials were able to persuade an anti-Chinese candidate to stand down from running for Congress in a Democratic primary in New York. So now you take all the data they're getting from TikTok. I told you all about how corporations in America can basically build a psychographic demographic profile of you. China can do the same thing. And China isn't buying the data. China is stealing it off your phone through TikTok, more probably. In addition, you've got hackers out there who are building in backdoors for China to infiltrate. Now they can take out the water grid, and then they can figure out the official at the water grid who's going to be persuasive to not turn the water grid back on or to help them sabotage it. At the same time, the Chinese are having all sorts of economic problems, and these economic problems are beginning to cause more nationalistic fervor in the Chinese government to try to distract people from their economic problems. So in China, they're pouring money into gold ETFs in the stock market. Why? Because there's nothing worth investing in China anymore, thanks to Xi Jinping's economic reforms. So the Chinese are trying to buy out all the gold around the world, and they're driving up gold prices, trying to find secure investments to get around Xi Jinping. As that economic instability grows, the angst in China grows, the war threat from China begins to grow because the Chinese need to distract people from their economic consequences. They built up this nationalist fervor in China. Now, let's layer into this new report from the Wall Street Journal out today. Russia and China are doubling down on defying the United States. Janet Yellen gave a talk about how she wants to work with China, but she doesn't want China to undermine her economy, and she doesn't want China to work with the Russians. 2 days after Janet Yellen meets with her Chinese counterparts and insists they need to not work with Russia, the Chinese and the Russians are found to be collaborating behind the scenes to undermine the United States. This, according to the Wall Street Journal. Not the editorial page, but the actual reporters. Russia and China have pledged to deepen their growing alliance and shared opposition to what they describe as the U.S.'s attempts to dominate the world order, with Moscow again seeking to boost trade with Beijing as it looks for new ways to bypass Western sanctions imposed due to Ukraine. The Chinese are at war with us already. They're trying to undermine us already. Have you seen the flood of Chinese nationals coming across the border already? And the United States government is asleep at the switch. There's a growing recognition, a bipartisan recognition in Washington, that China is no longer a trading partner or a rival, but an enemy. And yet the Biden administration is doing nothing to contain this. There are growing warning signs that the Chinese are already here, either inside your computers or actually in person. And they mean you harm. And in Washington, they seem to have no clue how to combat this. The Navy can't even get the naval procurement officers to build ships fast enough to respond to China. We got to step up our game. The Chinese are getting more dangerous, and at some point, they're going to turn belligerent, and it is exceedingly obvious to anyone willing to pay attention, and unfortunately, not enough people in Washington are willing to pay attention.